All right, guys. Well, welcome to this honest conversation. So, my name is Quinn, and I'm the president of the Detroit Spartans. And just to save us all a little bit of time, I'll just say go green. And as we go, we'll get an opportunity to get to meet each other and talk. This conversation is a response. It is a response to some of the things that have happened in the nation over the past year. As we all know, 2020 was not just another year, not for any of us in any way. But what really started this conversation was the death of George Floyd and just the divide that came about during that time. And so, truthfully, there was a letter written and sent out by the DC Spartans, and then another sent out by the Atlanta Spartans acknowledging the situation. And then it was suggested that we, as the Detroit Spartans, along with the other alumni chapters in the area, like MSUBA Oakland, formulate our own letter and send it out to the community. And as a part of that letter, we were challenged, and particularly Pamela challenged Jones, our what is she, a director? Challenged
Engagement director.
engagement director challenged me and the Detroit Spartans not just to do a letter, not just to do just say something, but to do something. And so what we did with that was we, along with the other alumni clubs, we put out a letter from the clubs that were willing to participate in the Metro Detroit area. And then we wrote in that letter things that you could do as a person and what we could do as a community. And one of the things that we said we could do is have conversations, talk to people who are not necessarily in your normal circle of influence, people that don't look like you, sound like you, believe like you, think like you, have some open dialogues and be curious. Just be curious about their experience. And so, as a board, the Detroit Spartans is a diverse enough board to where we have folks, like myself and like Steve, and then we have folks who are more conservative. We have, white women, white men. We have some diversity on our board, but more importantly, we have a relationship with each other enough to where we can talk and we can feel okay to have uncomfortable conversation. And so that was what we did. We wanted to do it not necessarily just for our board, but we feel like us as all college educated individuals have the most ability to be able to communicate with each other in a way to which we can communicate our message, but also to take it to an author, a doctor by the name of Brene Brown, be a little bit vulnerable where we can express ourselves and then not turn into a big conflict. And so we had an idea of doing a conversation with ourselves, doing a conversation with the other alumni leaders, and then helping to facilitate for you guys to have conversations and have conversations with your group. But ultimately, our ultimate goal in doing this is just to model having an open and honest conversation. So, and the way we want to do that is simply by following three simple rules, or it might be more than three, so forgive me. But first, like, just come here to listen first and talk second. I know we all get pretty passionate about our beliefs, but the goal here is to learn from each other and not necessarily to try and impress upon each other how we feel, but hopefully show each other how to hopefully see each other is what one of the goals is of this. And one of the things I just ask is when you share stories or you share your thoughts that you speak in terms of like me, I, and not talk about they and them. And if they did this, just speak about your personal experience and what you have dealt with instead of what they do. And the final thing I just want to ask of you guys is just to know that the whole point of this again is to start a conversation. It's not to finish it. So we're not trying to solve like all of the world's problems tonight because it's not going to happen because I want to wrap this up within about an hour or so. But hopefully what we can do is show you how to start an engagement, deal with a little conflict resolution in a way into which both parties don't walk away thinking worse of each other, but more so understanding each other. And so I thought by having that picture up of Izzo, it would give us an opportunity to kind of find some things that bring us together. And that first thing was winning a national title, which I know we also desperately want to do again. So really at the end of the day, there's a term that I became aware of back in September, and it's one that I realized has happened in the past, and we unfortunately see it happen now, and this thing called performative allyship. It's this thing where everyone was like, yeah, that's so bad, that sucks. All right, what's going on next? And so really what we want to do is to make sure that we're not just doing performative allyship. The university is not just doing performative allyship. And there's really, a little bit of money where your mouth is, and that is less lip service and more action. And part of that action is having this conversation. So we're going to have a conversation about some things that are uncomfortable and a little bit tough. And so I'm going to ask that we just be patient with each other. I'm going to ask again that we ask curious questions, and we just, again, we come here to listen and to understand each other. And so I want to jump straight into it and just kind of ask you guys, and to start, we're going to do a format to where it was just going to be an open conversation, but as it can be, these conversations can get passionate. And so I ask, if you want to say something and somebody is speaking, if you could just raise your hand, and if you go to the participant thing, and you should have the ability to raise your hand. If everybody could just raise their hand so I can see you can find it. So hit the participant bar. See a thumbs up. All right, you guys. All right, Ty, I see you. So if you raise your hand and leave it up, I can call on you, and that way we can have a little bit of organization, and then we can have a little bit of structure to this. And then I just ask is once you talk, let everybody else have an opportunity to talk before you jump back in, and we can go from there. So Rosa, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Sorry, I am tardy. I just walked in a house. I'm actually in Houston, so I'm an hour behind you guys.
No worries. I was just kind of talking about the structure of the conversation. I was just saying we want to just be fair to everybody, give them a chance to talk. So I was just saying, if someone's speaking and you have something to say, if you could just go to the participants menu and just raise your hand, and I'll call on people. And so that way we can just kind of be respectful and kind of hear each other out and go from there. So does that all sound good and fair? Anybody have any questions? We got thumbs up. I got two thumbs up. All right, three. All right. We are rolling. All right. Well, then we'll just jump into it. And so the first question I wanted to ask you guys, just in general, get the conversation going for you, is why do you feel like this is an important conversation to have, and what does it mean to you? I can tell you, for me, I think it's important because I think what we really need to work towards is the ability to see each other and understand our experience. So for me personally, racism is a factor in my life, and it's something that I unfortunately I deal with on a consistent, if not I'm not persecuted every day, but race is just a factor for me. And so recognizing that for most of my white peers, if not all, that's not a factor for them, it makes me realize that it's a conversation and something that we need to talk about, because I don't want to wait for another George Floyd type scenario to happen before I speak up, and before I acknowledge that, hey, when we walk out the door, the world isn't always the same. And so for me, it's not about necessarily, standing up and it's about what comes after protesting for me. And to me, what comes after protesting is just having a conversation and asking some serious questions and providing some heartfelt feedback. So that's what it's about for me. We can do this random style, but I'm gonna start with Kate, who's with the Detroit Spartan. And Kate, so what makes this conversation important for you, or something you want to be a part of?
And it definitely goes back to your point with the performative allyship. I don't want to be a performative ally. I want to make sure I have these conversations and talk to people and understand better what maybe I'm doing that I'm not aware of, that's not helping the issue, and what I can do to help the issue. And these conversations, Steve and Quinn and I have been, working on this for a while, and our conversation among our board was a really good, I think everyone came out of that really understanding each other better, and, just having the opportunity in the forum to listen and understand we can all grow and benefit from that, and just the ability to move forward and what we can do.
That's awesome. All right. One more thing I meant to put in there. It's okay to have awkward silence. So my wife's a therapist, so I get side therapy, and silence isn't always a bad thing. We don't have to fill the air here, but I do want to implore you guys to be curious and be honest with your question. So I'm gonna leave it open to whoever wants to go next. The question kind of is, what makes this an important conversation for you, or something worth your time? Because let's be honest, it's like 8 o'clock on a Wednesday. What makes this worth doing over watching Bridgerton? So
Quinn, this is Jerry Jank here from the West Michigan Spartans. You obviously are affected by this on an emotional level. Where I see it is, as we become more diverse as a society, we have to learn, to learn from each other. I work in an industry, I'm a CPA, and it's largely white. We don't have a lot of minority CPAs, so we're trying to work through that. So we have a program, it's called the Year of Understanding. We have different programs coming in. As part of that, I mentor young minority CPAs coming in to try to get that dialogue going, both on a one-on-one level, but both on a company level too. So, but as we're more diverse, we just can't have these disagreements. We just have to learn how to talk to each other, how to deal with each other. And I think that's very important on all levels.
Absolutely.
Quinn, I can go. So Paul Quirk from the Indy Spartans. For me, this is important because, I grew up in Sterling Heights, but I frequently went with my friends downtown Detroit. And one of the things I enjoyed was the diversity that I saw and experienced while being in downtown Detroit for whatever events were down there and stuff like that. When I moved to Indianapolis and started my job as a school counselor, the school district that I worked in and still work in 30 years later, was not diverse at all. We had one Black student in the entire school corporation. And for me, that was not reality from where I grew up to going to Michigan State and grad school and things like that. So, I thought something's got to change here, and I'm hoping that something changes, because what our students were experiencing was not reality. I mean, we weren't diverse in any way, Asian, Hispanic, whatever the case might be. Well, in the 30 years, my school corporation has definitely changed to the better, as far as I'm concerned, because it's become more diverse. And I felt like my students benefit more from that experience of being around other diverse populations and different races and everything else, because when they go out into the real world, they're going to encounter Asian people, Black people, Indian people, whatever the case might be. And but I also know that with the changes comes those folks that have lived in my area their entire lives or for a long time. There's definitely a lot of racism there. And it's been something where some of our folks have handled it well and some of our folks haven't handled it well. The one thing I'm also glad at is the corporation has gotten diverse in staff as well. So we're getting, Asian teachers, we're getting Black teachers, because our students need to see that as well from their teachers. But what I need to know, or what I need to be educated on, is, when I'm dealing with Black students, for example, and they're seeing me as this white guy, besides listening, because that's my number one job as a school counselor, is what else can I help those students with? So I'm open to, hearing what everyone has to say, and, educating myself as much as possible in regards to how I can help my students.
Thanks, Paul.
Hey everyone, Shay Marlowe here on behalf of the Atlanta Spartans. Thank you all for hosting this awesome conversation. Really excited to be here, first and foremost. To answer, give my perspective on the question, why is this conversation important? I almost dare to think, like, why is it not important? For timeliness, it is Black History Month, so I think I couldn't help but acknowledge that. From another perspective, we have our first female vice president who happens to identify as Black, among other race and ethnicities. And then, just a month ago, we're celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King. We, again, recognize so many national and historical figures from Michigan State that we, I'm sure all feel very passionate about. But for me, myself personally, as a young Black man who was raised by another Black man, I would say that this is a conversation that I almost feel like I have either internally or externally every day. So I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation. For me, it's really just about promoting a sense of self. I went to the Civil Rights Museum this past weekend, and I just kind of felt this overwhelming sense of pride in who I am and how I identify, not just as a man, not just as African American, but just as a citizen of the United States who feels that I am present and I am whole, and that people see me in a certain way that sometimes I don't even see myself. And so the ability to recognize who you are and how you identify and amongst others is really powerful. And so I'm just really, again, feeling humbled that we're having this conversation among, if we could be honest, a virtual room of individuals who may or may not identify as one race or ethnicity as the other. So again, I'm just really grateful you guys are doing this. So thanks again.
Glad to have you, man.
Hey, Quinn, John LaCroix, another West Michigan Spartan. And, that my sort of smart ass comment to why is this important to me is because Steve Culp texted me last night during the basketball game and asked me to be on this last night. And I don't have a whole lot of deep thought on this, but I do want to, why it's important to me is just on the general sense of, just trying to be a better person and learn what other people go through. Because quite frankly, I've, in the grand scale of things, I've had it pretty easy in life. And, and the other part of it is that probably 20, 25 years ago, my sister has two half African-American boys, single mom, and I was part-time dad, with those boys. And I could see in Grand Rapids where, it's more diverse than it used to be, but it's still not a diversity mecca, if you will, but, and to see the things the looks, it wasn't people saying things or anything, but just sometimes the looks that my nephews would get. And you just, you knew what they were thinking. And it ticked you off, but and then there were, other times where they had, more than just looks sometimes. So, so that's on a very, brief, why it's important. Those are the two biggest.
Thank you for sharing that.
Rosa here with the Houston Spartans. First, thank you for putting this together. Thank you everyone for sharing. When I originally saw the invite or post or open for discussion, I can't remember how I saw it, but the thing that struck me was we have a platform. And we have a platform for being Michigan State alumni. We have a platform for being a part of our alumni organizations, our families, our jobs, whatever role we have. And so we have a platform to shape our community. And our community is going to be comprised of different flights for everyone. And the conversation I always like to have with people, no matter what they ask me, well, are you interested in learning or are you just talking? Because if you're open to learning and having the conversation, then that is what uplifts us together as a community. And it is these conversations that do it. So when you guys go back to your own perspectives in your own families and your own lives, now you have been more open to receive, and I've learned your plights and you've learned mine. And now we've built a sense of community, and that's how it starts. Recently, I watched American Skin, and it upset me because I just was like, I felt like it wasn't for me. It was for people who are non-minorities to better understand our plights, what it's like to look like a certain way or go through certain things. So that's why I thought this was a really important conversation. I'm very grateful that, albeit what has happened in our past, we are now starting to have these conversations outside of people that look like me.
Thanks.
I'll go next. My name is Ann, and I'm with the Calhoun County Spartans. And so I guess many reasons why I think this topic is so important. I was so glad to see Steve's post many weeks ago. It was really something that I'm very interested in. I'm in a book club, and most of the people in my book club are men, interestingly enough. And we usually read nonfiction books, no surprise. And several years ago, the book that, and I read books that I would never choose on my own. And one of the books was called The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. And after I read that book, in the middle of reading that book, I was so embarrassed that I didn't even know about the quote, Great Migration. I never remembered learning about that in school. I'd never heard anybody talk about that in my circle of friends. I didn't know it was such a thing. I mean, so that was one wake-up call for me. Another book we read was The Color of Law, which is a really, really good book. I can't remember the author's name, but he came to Battle Creek actually and did a presentation on basically redlining and the history of that. And so between these two books, it really piqued my interest in learning more and kind of leaning in and listening more to people's real stories. And one of the people in the book club happened to be a realtor, and she shared with us that in 2018, one of the departments of the federal government did a survey in Battle Creek. And what they found, believe it or not, in 2018 was that people of color were being discriminated against in terms of the neighborhoods that the realtors were showing them houses in, which I was just like, I couldn't believe it, but easy for me to say, right? So having those things, and then my daughter and I went to see John Lewis speak at Michigan State. It was in, I can't remember, 2017, 16. That was eye-opening to hear his version of what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And while I don't live in Battle Creek, I live about 25-minute drive from there. I do go to Battle Creek frequently for my job and other things. Battle Creek has a very rich history with Sojourner Truth is buried there, the Underground Railroad. There's a beautiful statue of the Underground Railroad in the backyard of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. The Kellogg Foundation has actually had racial equity as part of their pillars before it was really a big thing, probably for 15 years. So in our community, at least the community that I identify with, it's very much front and center. There's a Center for Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation community. And so again, I've just kind of been trying to lean into these things as much as I can. And it's uncomfortable sometimes, having the background that I have. But I'm willing to listen and learn. And I will say I think it's important that folks that look like me don't say to Black folks, you guys have to teach us everything. That's not, that's something that I've learned. It's not your responsibility. It's our responsibility to learn about things like Black Wall Street. I never knew about Black Wall Street and what happened there until, the past year or so. So just trying to lean in and learn more and listen more.
Thank you.
I'll go. My name's Cayman. I'm from Grand Traverse area, Spartans up here in Traverse City. I grew up here, so we don't really have much diversity up here. I grew up with a lot of Native Americans, so it's just kind of completely different. Getting more diversity up here, but after I went to Michigan State, I've lived all over. I've traveled the world, so I've been exposed to a lot more, but I lived in St. Louis, so I was really involved there with a travel job, and I lived in Nashville, Tennessee, and I lived in Orlando. So plus I've traveled and lived in Australia and London.
I'll go ahead and go. Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Johnson. First, I want to apologize having computer issues, so sorry about jumping on and off and with my phone now, but also want to thank the Detroit Spartans for kind of hosting this and kicking it off again. I live in the Twin Cities right now, kind of crazy, I guess, epicenter of a lot of the changes that have been happening. So I think Michigan State introduced, I know a couple of you talked about it. Michigan State introduced us, at least introduced me to a much more diverse crowd than I'd ever experienced before. So kind of continuing to learn from that, continuing to listen, continuing to understand, I think, and you mentioned it, even in this past year, it's like, I had no idea some of these things were still happening. It was, you think about like, oh, this was happening in the 50s and 60s, and it's happening now. So being able to listen and learn and have tough conversations is really important.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being here.
Why is this conversation important? I'll kind of go off of Brittany. My experience is a little different. For those that don't know, I was actually born and raised in South Central Los Angeles during the height of what South Central Los Angeles is known, and then left to go to Michigan State. And my arrival at Michigan State was kind of met with, people, my God, I can't believe you're from LA. Like, they could not believe, why would you come here? You're from Los Angeles. Everybody wants to move to Los Angeles. And they thought that was fantastic. But then when I would speak to my experiences of growing up in South Central LA, I had people that were friends that would literally look at me and say, that's not real. That doesn't happen. That is not like that in South Central LA. It can't be. So I went through, years of having friends who would just couldn't fathom what my life was like, or didn't want to believe it because it made them uncomfortable, to be honest. I think a lot of them made it uncomfortable. So as we have, as I've gone through college and started to work, I've really, within this last year or so, put a lot of faith in these conversations. I truly think this is one of our best ways to try to solve a lot of our polarizing struggles, because I realize that I can bleed green as much as the guy down the hall, but when we look at the situation, they see it completely different. They, you know, when I tell them of the experience of being pulled out of a car, being pulled over in a car, the reason being pulled over in the car is because they thought the expiration on the license was expired, which it wasn't. But as I'm pulled out of the car, I have a shotgun in my chest from a cop. The reason he has a shotgun in my chest is because the color of my hat matches the color of my jacket. As in, my Michigan State hat is the same color as my Michigan State jacket, but he doesn't know if those aren't gang colors, right? And to then have a friend say, it just doesn't happen that way. That's not, you're overreacting to not want to even, you know, recognize my experience for a long time was a struggle. I think and hope this helps to bring people together. And John and I were in the same dorm, and you know, we had people on our floor that really say, I've never met a Black person ever until college, you know, which is, you know, to me, I'm like, you know, where I happened to go to school was outside South Central LA. I had Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Arabic, everything. But I, you know, for me, that's why I've really been proud that this is our second conversation we've had so far, and hopefully we have more.
Good evening. My name is Taylor Parker. I know it's 8:42, so I want to be quick. But I do believe that this conversation is important for many reasons that I've already heard on this call, to learn, to grow, to understand, to facilitate change. I have a different experience from Steve, where I am from Detroit. I didn't have any white kids grow up with me. And the only time that I was able to really explore other neighborhoods is because I played sports. So Quinn, who was at a neighboring school, which is Ferndale, down the street from the school that I graduated from, Oak Park High School, had a totally different demographic within not even 3 miles from each other. And so going to Michigan State and again, having that same experience, having a dorm floor mate that had blatantly told you like a Black person before, or just, you know, tell me more about yourself. And at first I had to, it was kind of offensive sometimes, because what I found myself being in many spaces, even to this day, is the representative. And I'm in education, Paul, Steve. So I work with students that identify with me. And so I try to provide them with ways to explore outside of what the norm is for them, and to expose them. So to Paul, you have to, one of those things is exposure is very key. And so with that, I think with exposure, learning, understanding, growing, and I'm kind of past, maybe because of my experience with conversations, I'm looking for action, but I know that this is the first step in order to get to those sustainable actions. So thank you for this platform. I'm greatly appreciative of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ty. P.S. Didn't know you went to Oak Park.
Well, I'm originally from northern Wisconsin. Never saw a Black person until I got to Michigan State. And my first person was Bubba Smith. So I'll tell you, kind of a little bit different there. But and I live now in Marshall. And the big thing we've been doing right now is because Albion and Marshall school systems joined together, was trying to work together with them. And that's the hard part. We thought everybody was going to get together, have a picnic and sing Kumbaya by the end, but it's not working. And so I'm on here just to see what more things we could be doing.
Great. Well, as you know, thank you, Ty, for pointing out it's 8:46. I just, going forward, I just want to remind you guys, like, so as we have this conversation, just know that just speak from your heart, speak about your experience. And that way I think we can kind of move it along, but also make sure that we don't, you know, stop someone else from saying their feelings. So I just ask going forward that you speak for about your experience, your story, Speaking of which, Shay kind of spoke to it a little bit earlier. It is Black History Month. And one of the comments that was kind of made when, we were putting this together earlier is that some people feel like the expression of Black History Month is, an example of racism, or this isn't a real term. Reverse racism isn't a real thing. It's just racism. But some people think it's a form of reverse racism, which again isn't a real thing. But that brought about the question which we were going to ask today of what is your experience of white privilege and what does it mean to you? And so I just want to throw that out there for you guys because I know it's different for different people. So just in general, we're all Spartans, and I just want to take off the guardrails. This isn't an attack on anyone or an opportunity for us to try and persecute anyone, but honestly, what does white privilege mean to you? And again, about you, not what do you think other people think it means. What does white privilege mean to you? And so with that, I know it's a tricky question. And so I'll toss it to Steve first to kind of set us up.
I actually will tell you, I'm honestly befuddled, if that's a correct word, to why some people struggle with what it means or what the intention of it means. It just means that if you are white in this country, there are not as many hurdles on the track. Depending on what we're talking about, there aren't any hurdles. That doesn't mean your experience is easy, but it's not hard. Whatever the struggles with, it's not because you're white. It might be because you're a woman. It could be because you're Muslim. It could be because you are not heterosexual. It could be because your family doesn't have a large income, but traditionally, there's not many ways where it's because you're white. I know because the understanding of that then puts certain groups in a bad spot. So there has to be a counter measurement to that. Because if all of us agree to it, then it's kind of like, Quinn, would you say with the pie? Like, it's not like if we get more, you get less, right? Like if we all acknowledge that there's white privilege, some people feel like that puts them at a disadvantage. Where I would say it puts all of us in an advantage to understand the problems we need to tackle. I think one of the most glaring examples is my mother had to talk to me about when I got pulled over by a cop. As a white kid, did anybody have that conversation?
And Steve, I'll build off of that. As a white woman, I've been speeding. I should have gotten a ticket. I don't even get a ticket because I'm a white woman getting pulled over by a cop. I've never had a conversation like that at all.
No,
and that's exactly the white privilege in action, right? But I think I didn't mean to fully.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
But, I just wanted to say that for me, I think I always, growing up, I went to Northfield Public Schools, which was there's some diversity, but a predominantly white school system. White privilege was always something that I knew and understood the definition of it, but it wasn't until I got older and went to Michigan State and got into the workforce that I became more aware of it at play. And I think that's also a white privilege, that I wasn't just, it wasn't until I was older and in a more diverse school or work setting that I felt the differences, or I started to notice things that, that awareness didn't come until I was older, as opposed to, something like your parents have to tell you, or your parents had to talk to you, Steve, about, getting pulled over by a cop. I didn't have that conversation with my parents. They just said, don't get pulled over because don't be dumb driving. It would not, someone might pull you over just because because of the way you look. So it's definitely something that, the fact that I did not have a full awareness, even though I understood what it was until I was older, is telling, I think.
Yeah, it reminds me, and my Black counterparts know what DWB is. So it's something that we all have been guilty of, is driving while Black. So to Steve's point, I didn't get the privilege of getting pulled out of my car with a shotgun. I got the privilege of having the whole freeway shut down and pulled out with 20 guns on my back. So, and the privilege of being mistaken for a 6'5" slender Black man, which I am Black. I've definitely never been slender though. So, and even the smallest bit of police work would have clued someone in that I wasn't the guy they were looking for. But DWB is a real thing. So, but I want to be honest. I know that white privilege, for some people, they don't think it's a thing. And so I want to just acknowledge that some people struggle with that concept. And I want to throw it out there because I know it's true that some people think that. So I don't want to ignore it. But Ty, go ahead. Oh, Ty, you're muted.
Don't we make that mistake at least once a week? So I just wanted to also throw out there, because I myself thought that something was wrong with me at Michigan State when I had a new car, the same model year as the year I was driving. I don't want to age myself, so I won't say right now. But I had a fortunate position to work at the Fizz plant, and for the Fizz plant, which was a night job, 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. Shift. And I didn't even realize how focused the police was, not just on males. I knew about males, but on females. Like, I got pulled over literally maybe twice or 3 times a month coming from work. It would probably be like a Wednesday, Harper Wednesdays type night, but because they would say my window tint was too dark and they couldn't see me. And it was, all these other things. I had a black car with black interior and it was dark. So I was like, am I the only one getting pulled over? Like, I knew I have a nice car and I'm Black. Okay. It may appear that I have tint, but I literally did. The only time I did not get tint on my car because I knew I was Black at Michigan State. And so I want people to understand, like, this is not just with men, because I thought it was overwhelmingly with men only with driving while Black, but it's also women too. And that's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother fear for me. Like, I don't know if people could, see the parallel, but that's a whole nother level of being surrounded by white, powerful men with guns and 17, 18 years old, young Black woman. So I think even just hearing some of the stories that are shared is like, oh yeah, I never had to deal with that. And so maybe that could spark some thoughts in everyone else's mind, or even knowing others that you may have known that you may not have thought, but it's true.
Hey, Quinn, John LaCroix again. And, I had a conversation with a former West Michigan Spartan board member of ours, Eddie Stevens, who is African-American. And it was my wife and I think we were actually down in East Lansing. And I don't remember how we even got on the topic, but I guess where the white privilege thing to me was just what he said he wanted. And he's like, John, he's like, all I want when I walk into a room is to be given the benefit of the doubt. And that, excuse me, that stuck with me because, I guess in a quick sentence, white privilege is that I am given the benefit of the doubt. And so that, I guess that's what stuck with me. And I think that's probably the most concise definition, that I've heard anyways.
I want to just highlight that because that's powerful, and I'll just agree with that. That's what we're asking for when we, and I there's like three of the black people on here. I'll speak for just this black person and I'll say this, yeah, that's what we want. Like, we want to walk into a room and people to not automatically feel different or feel, like more aware that they have to watch themselves. We want that same benefit of the doubt. And
I think one thing, I'll jump in quick. I remember reading a book freshman year, actually, at Michigan State. And it talked about white privilege. And it was something even as simple as, well, what color is the color nude? Like, whether it's a Band-Aid, whether it's females when you pull out tights, whether it's the coloring crayon, and it's like, oh, it's the color of my skin, but that's not how everyone looks. That's not the color of skin. That's not nude. That's one specific. So it was even small things like that, but completely agree. Yeah, it's small things that end up adding up over time, I think, that you don't even realize. And so taking a step back and, like you said, I think John and Quinn said it perfectly, like walking into the room and again, not judging or changing your reaction because of who's in the room.
Yeah, and I want to keep that question open, but just throw another one into the air just for time's sake and to keep it moving. Another part of that equation too is, for all of us, my question to add in is like, when was the first time you experienced or recognized like your race and it was different? And what was that experience like? I'll always tell people the story first. Ty kind of alluded to it. So I grew up in Ferndale, and Ferndale is actually unique from Michigan State for me because Ferndale is diverse, both socioeconomically and racially. And, Ferndale was unique in my opinion because it was a big melting pot. So like I had white friends, I had Chaldean friends, I had Asian friends, I had poor friends, I had rich friends. And, when I got to Michigan State was very diverse, but in a lot of ways it was very segregated. Like, for example, when I had friends who were like from DPS or the Detroit schools, they hung out together and the black kids hung out together and the white kids hung out together. And so I came from Ferndale where everybody hung out together. So I just hung, and it took me a minute and my peers too to catch on, like, wait, oh, they're over here. And APAC, El Paso's over here. And, so I recognized my race when I was 5 though, because that was the first time somebody called me the N-word, and it came from like a friend. So because we were playing and he said, my dad said, you're the N-word, and we're 5. So at the time I didn't really fully understand all the implications until I went home, and my mom was like furious. She was like, what happened? And so unfortunately, that kid, I don't know why, but he wasn't at the school that much longer. But it was a big deal. It was a very big deal. And that was the first time, one of the most first times it set in, because, being black, you experience that you're black, but like you don't feel it until something like that happens and you realize that, whoa, well, there is a difference. People are treating you different. It's not just you feel a certain type of way. No, people treat you differently. And there's sometimes our words that hit different than other words. When the N word hits harder than other words, it just does. So that was my first experience with recognizing that I was black and that being black was different.
I'll go. So I am multiracial. My mother is African American and my father is Native American. He's Navajo. I grew up in a very, very diverse family. Our family grew up in Rochester. We're a military family. I went to high school at Rollo Kimbo. My experiences were very different. My son is black. His dad is black. He's black. And I had some experiences, but my experiences were actually more against my black side than my American Indian side. And that's another conversation. But what I distinctly remember and I call it a clipping of wings. And it goes into your question in regards to privilege and when you experienced it. My son was 12 years old, and he wanted to go to the movies with his friends like any normal kid. And I'm getting ready to drop him off, and this was past the Trayvon Martin, but it was still resonating in the background. And he had a hoodie on, and he goes to a very affluent school and all of these things that we do to put our kids in a better, situation. And it dawned on me that, or he said, my friends are sneaking into other movie theaters. And so as a parent, you have that conversation. No, you shouldn't do that. But it dawned on me that he looks different from all his other friends, and he may or may not be singled out. And oh shit, excuse my French, I didn't prepare him for that. And it was a moment for me where I had to clip my son's wings, because we were always raised a certain way. But as a parent, you also have to, being a parent of a Black child, you have to always teach them to navigate through this racial minefield in America. So that was one. The second one was last year. He is an affluent soccer player, and he got called the N-word on the soccer field. And more importantly, his coach didn't take up for him. So I had to go in full-blown helicopter mom mode and raise that all the way up the flagpole to the AD. So that, to me, racism has hit more home in navigating my Black son through this time, more so than me, and what he is being exposed to, because being different is not bad. It is not bad. It is other people's problems, but unfortunately, you do have to be aware of how to navigate through it without clipping their wings.
That's interesting. Oh, were you gonna talk? Go ahead, Steve.
You go first.
Okay. I kind of wanted to piggyback off of that, or ask a question. So though I did not go to school and have peers that were white, I actually had my first Girl Scout troop leader in the neighborhood that was white. And that was my first experience, because with the Girl Scout troop, everyone from the school, but this nice young white woman that was our troop leader, that actually just happened to live in the neighborhood. It was actually temporarily, like maybe 2 years. But she had shown us, like we did a sleepover, and like it was just different. And so it was one of the other girls, and I don't recall everything exactly, like the situation that happened or why that conversation had to come up. But my troop leader had to tell us like we were different. But she was so my first engagement wasn't a negative encounter. Thankfully, it was actually a very positive encounter, because that particular woman cared and loved us. And so she kind of like primed us a little bit at 6. I was like a brownie, whatever, 6 years old. But that was my first time like having to look at someone and like, oh, like, yeah. I mean, I even had white teachers, but I didn't like, it just never, resonated with me. But whatever happened at that time had me really think, like, had to recognize that there is a difference. And the other question I was going to ask, and I'm not sure if those are on the call who have younger children, like, you may not have to have those same conversations saying, okay, when you're out, you can't do this and you can't do that. I have a 7-year-old nephew, and I'm like, when are we going to have this conversation? He's actually in Ferndale schools, but I'm like, when do we got to have this conversation? And I'm actually scared every day sometimes. Well, not during COVID because he's home, but like, do other people, even in the white community, have some type of conversation, not necessarily with the police, but just being different maybe, or being out with people that are different from them, have those type of conversations? What do those look like? But thank you.
Well, Ty, I'm going to piggyback on a little bit of what you're saying there. I have two multiracial grandsons. My daughter-in-law is Black, and that is a conversation my wife and I have already talked about that we're going to have with our two grandsons, and especially because about 3 years ago, we were driving down to Louisiana with the boys. They were in the back seat of the car, and it was about 10 o'clock at night. We're driving through Alabama, and my wife was driving, and I was in the passenger seat just kind of playing with my phone, and all of a sudden, lights went on behind us. And I'm like, what the heck did you do? And she pulls over, and I'm looking in the side mirror. I see one cop car. I see two cop cars behind us. And they're sitting back there for the longest time. No one's coming up to the car. The boys are wondering what the heck's going on. So all of a sudden, one police officer comes up on my wife's side of the car on the driver's side. Another one comes up on my side. The first thing they do is they open the back doors where the two boys are sitting. And of course, I'm like, what the heck here? And, you know, they're like, you know, they're trying to be nice to the boys. Hey, buddies, it's okay, you know, blah, blah, blah. And we both have our windows down, and they immediately start yelling at us, put your hands on the dash, let's see your hands, that type of thing. And these boys are witnessing this whole thing. And they tell my wife to get out of the car. They take her back to the cop car. He takes me out. He has me get out of the car. He has me put my hands on the roof. He's searching me and everything else. Well, it turns out that the reason we got pulled over was because I had a black Kia Optima, and they were looking for a stolen black Kia Optima with a Spartan license plate, personalized plate. The only difference was I had the exact same personalized plate as someone in Texas who has a black Kia Optima with a Texas license plate instead of an Indiana, and they didn't see it until they questioned me a little bit. And I'm like, we're just driving down to Louisiana from Indiana. And they're like, oh, you're from Indiana? And they pulls up on his phone this picture. Well, now you freaked out the boys and everything else. My wife and I got back in the car, and we sat there for a few minutes before we pulled away. And we both said, what if we would have been Black? What would those cops, what would their reaction have been? But I guarantee you, our grandsons remember that. They're remembering that situation that happened. And we're going to have a conversation with them as they get older and they start driving about, you know, you remember that situation that happened on the way down to Louisiana. It may be different if that was you driving versus us driving. We're not looking forward to that day.
Yeah, I will just, I'd also like to mention that, you know, research also shows that these things that some of you folks have talked about, you know, those are very traumatic experiences. And one time is bad enough, but I'm sure for a lot of you guys on here, you've experienced that multiple times. And that does a lot to somebody's psyche and somebody's soul when you have those things happen over and over. You know, Paul, can you imagine if that happened to you over and over? I mean, you know, I don't know if we're ever going to get into that, but I think that's something that people like me, that is a privilege we have. I've never had that happen once to me, you know, so I don't know what that is like. Some of the other things I wrote down were, I never have to worry about somebody thinking that I'm shoplifting in a store. I never have to worry about, you know, safety in my neighborhood.
I never have to worry about getting pulled out of your car at gunpoint.
Exactly. Yep. And just even college, when you think about going to college, you know, I come from a family where my 3 older brothers went to college. My dad went to Michigan State. It was easy for me. You know, it was easy. The whole process was easy for my kids, my 3 kids that went to MSU and ones there. It's easy for them because we can give them all of our experiences. That's not the way it is for everybody, especially a first gen, college student. So I believe that privilege is very real. And I realize, I think I have every privilege that there can be out there, to tell you the truth. So I do try and be aware of it. I educate my kids on it. We talk about it all the time. But again, these stories are eye-opening.
You know what? I just want to say that you guys are talking about cops, and I just want to come from a different perspective. My dad is a retired sheriff. So he was down in Washtenaw County the first part of my life, and then retired, and then was up in Leelanau County, and then was elected sheriff up here. So, it's really hard to hear what you guys have gone through, but you also have to understand the family side of it, coming from a family that your dad is on the road, risking his life, being, I actually really liked that he was elected sheriff, because that was my high school and college days. He was in the office and not pulling my friends over. But, all throughout he was actually undercover. He was doing all those really hard stuff that, I don't approve of what you guys are saying. So, I mean, I'm not saying all cops are like that. So I'm really sorry to hear what a lot of you have gone through. But there are good guys out there, and, they're just trying to do their jobs. So just, know that, I mean, my dad, just dealing with like the sheriff, getting the phone calls of having to deal with going to the doors and telling somebody that somebody had passed away and stuff, just the hard calls that he had to make. So just know that, there are tough things that they had to deal with. So I guess the privilege part, I mean, for me growing up, honestly, I've never touched a gun, and knowing that I went to sleep at night, knowing that my dad was home and knew if anything went wrong, he was there. I have recently talked to him about going to a gun range, because I feel like having a dad as a cop, I should know how to do that. But, just having that, is just comforting. And, I'm a single woman and living in downtown Traverse City. I feel very safe. Sometimes I feel like I'm too safe, so I'm very mindful of my surroundings, but, that's a privilege too. You know what I mean? Of our surroundings. I've been very worldly travel. I've been very blessed about where I've been able to travel. I feel like that is a very, I'm very lucky with that as well. Believe it or not, I've been to the Amazon. I've gotten to see people in very poor conditions, and that's been very eye-opening, you guys, to like see, when you're in a position and not to see what people have. So I don't know, we're just very privileged, just to see what good we have. So I don't know, my short of it is, the police is just, just the other side of it. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I don't even want to push back on that, but I will say, this isn't a bash the police type of scenario. My brother's a police.
Okay.
So I think part of the problem we have in this country is we always try to make things binary and for or against. And this is not a for or against argument. This is a cry for just humanity being restored to people. That was why it's always ironic to me why some people think that, like, if someone says Black Lives Matter, they're saying another life doesn't. It's not a binary thing. It's not a polarism thing saying we don't agree. That's why I always laugh when people say, oh, if you say Black Lives Matter, you don't support the cops. And then I'm like, that's funny. You must not know my brother's a police officer. My grandfather was a constable, and I come from a family full of cops. So it's not about opposing law enforcement. It's about trying to restore the humanity that people feel like has been stripped away. And that's really where we want to go, because a badge is not something that people see when you walk out of a door unless you're wearing that uniform. My uncle was he was a real cop and never wore a badge. So, and I'll just leave it at that. But you know, he didn't have the privilege of people recognizing him by it, and so it's restoring humanity is more what we're trying to have a conversation about. We're not trying to impose anyone's profession. So
Yeah. No, my dad was the president of the sheriff association at Michigan, for the state and Michigan and stuff. So I just wanted to say that's all. I think it's a privilege, or I just wanted to tie it in with the safety factor, I guess, really, for me.
Yeah, no, everyone deserves to go home safely. I get it.
Well, Quinn, a couple of years ago, my wife works at the university, and she works with minority students, getting them into STEM programs and stuff. And she had her annual conference, and there was a group from the University of Florida and a group of students that were working on an app that they were going to be trying out in the state of Florida that worked with decreasing the interaction between police and the people that they pull over, because no matter what the situation is, no matter who you are, when you get pulled over by the police officer's height of stress level goes up. The person getting pulled over, your heart starts racing more and things like that. So what their thing is they were going to create an app that the police officer wouldn't even have to get out of the car. The person doesn't get out of the car, and you just pull up an app on your phone. You communicate with the police officer through your phone. You send your driver's license through the app, and take care of it all there, just without even getting out of the car and having that interaction that then heightens things up and stuff. I don't know where they're at in regards to that process, but as I was hearing that during that conference, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea if you can get it to work.
Love technology.
Mm-hmm.
Love that idea too. And, just to speak on that from, just being in the room with conversations, and I was someone who grew up with guns on the counter and seeing them through just my family members, like, yeah, I mean, it is a stressful job for them, and they don't always have all the tools they need. So, to your point, Kay, they could have just came back from a domestic violence case, and now they're dealing with you, and that like turnaround time is not there, like, just because we are humans. And so that's one of the conversations I've been having in some of the work I've been doing outside of the university, is helping everyone to recognize that we're all dealing with different circumstances, and restoring that view that, like, hey, you're bringing some stuff to this conversation just like I am. How do we diffuse that and just see each other in the moment?
I'll speak to for if you guys don't know, I coach high school football. So I have two kids that I've coached for a few years now, whose mother and father are police officers, and they live in my subdivision. Matter of fact, I just saw them yesterday walking past my house with their dogs. So after the murder of George Floyd, he kind of reached out. He said, "Steve, would you be willing to sit down and talk?" Sure, no problem. Actually asked my wife, would Steve be willing to? And she's like, yeah, he definitely will talk. So we sat down and talked, and he said, as a father, as a police officer, and as a department, and I live in Troy, Michigan, if I didn't put that out there earlier, he was hoping to sit down and speak to see how he could help, in particular, the Black community. They don't have any Black officers on their force. To my knowledge, Troy has had no issues in forever in terms of their police force, any major issues. But he wanted to sit down and talk, and he admitted he had not had a Black friend until he went to the military. So we sat down and talked, and I think it was very eye-opening for both of us. We didn't get very intense in terms of like, he had some thoughts on Ferguson that I thought differently. We didn't really dive into that. But what I came away with was we had talked about institutional racism. And I said, Black people, not they're a monolith, but in general, don't trust the police. We're told to trust the police, that the police are good, but we can see things individually that are opposite of that. I said, for example, when I'm driving with a friend and they want the ID of the passenger, why? He's not the driver and you're pulling me over for a driving, offense. But you wouldn't do that if it's two older white women, right? That's not the same. He said, you're right, we wouldn't. And he pointed to quotas. He said, we have quotas, and if we know we're getting at the end of the quota, we are definitely for what we think we have a better chance quota with. So I said, well, there you go. You might not be racist, you might not be bigoted, but your instinct of filling this quota leads you to ask for the passenger's ID of my car, but not of another car. Should always be the same procedures. If my car gets pulled over for running a red light and you're going to ask for both IDs, and this older white woman and her best friend is also older white woman get pulled over for running a red light, you should pull both of their IDs. If you're doing something different based upon a quota or based upon a policy or structure, there you go, right there. It doesn't mean you're bigoted or racist or anything, but there's the problem. Now, if I know that, why would I have as much trust as this older white woman if I know you will do that based upon skin color? And it was eye-opening because he kind of was like, yeah, again, that was from sitting down and having a conversation, which gets to the original point of this. Like, this is what we have to do. We have to sit down. And I've also told him, I have no fear in Troy of the Troy police. Now, I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because I know 3 cops on the force that are high ranking because of coaching football. I mean, maybe that's a lot of it. And I told them I have their names memorized. If I get pulled over, the first thing I'm gonna say is, can you contact Officer Copley? Can you contact Officer Adad? Can you contact in Royal Oak? Can you contact Officer Frazier? Now, maybe part of that's me protecting myself, and maybe that's part of why I'm not scared, right? Of Troy police, that not other police, but of Troy. And I told him that, and there was aha moments on both sides.
Can I just add something you just talked about too, Steve, that and a great resource is a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And correct me if I get as Kendi X. Ibram. He has a book about being an anti-racist, because a lot of times when we think about racists, we think about people and we say, you're a racist, Quinn. But the reality is that racism isn't just about a person, it's about policies, it's about procedures, it's about institutionalized things that we weren't aware of, things called redlinings, where, we talked about earlier, where realtors wouldn't show Black or minority people certain houses. These are all forms of racism. Or, Steve, to Steve's point, a quota, like the quota where you have to have so many pullovers and you pull over this Black guy because, the numbers in your mind are statistically higher. That's a racist policy. And that's really where we have to, understand this racism thing is much bigger than just calling each other names. The thing that I always challenge and push back on people on is like to recognize racism isn't just like a white thing. And that everyone on here, and I hate to point fingers, so I just pointed at me first, we've all said something racist. And if you think you haven't, I think I would implore you to be honest with yourself, because racism is an action, it's a verb, it's something we all have the capability to do. And you might say, no, not me, I'm not racist. You might not feel like you're racist, but you've supported racist policies before. You've supported racist ideals before. And it might have been with the best of intentions too. And that really is a core I wanted to hit on as we try and bring this thing home. The last question I wanted to throw out there as we try to bring this home is, knowing that what we've seen with the election, the division in this country, how it feels like this is a very divisive time, how it feels like this is a time where, people just don't relate. There's some folks who are super conservative or super Trump supporters or QAnon, and there's some folks who are progressive, and some who are like super liberal, and like these agendas, they're all just like they seem to be conflicting, and it seems like a very diverse time. But it made me think about something I saw, and I wanted to share with you guys. And it's just, I'll leave it up for a quick second, and it just speaks to like how it feels like this is like the most like divided time in our nation. And it was just this picture, and right now we feel like, oh my God, it's so divided. But it was less than 70 years ago where this was a reality, where there was a white fountain and a colored fountain. And colored was pretty much for anyone who was not white. So that division where we feel now, that animosity, all those emotions, they all seem to boil up because we're living them in real time. But the true reality is this is like within the past, our grandparents. Think about this. My grandparents experienced this. My parents were children when this type of thing was going on. So it takes me to my last question I want to just throw out for you guys to think about, is with all those elements, like, how do we see each other like as people? That was why I kind of hopped on the whole, like, the cop thing. Like, how do we see each other as people? How can I share with you my story, my experience, to where it doesn't feel like far removed from you, and it doesn't feel like, oh, that was probably just him. It sucks that you got pulled over and pulled out of your car on the freeway with 20 guns on your back, but it probably was just a you thing. How do we see each other? So that's my last question I want to pose to you guys. And Kate has her hand raised.
Yeah. So I think, I think the biggest reason that we're not seeing each other as people is because a lot of the conversations aren't happening virtually face to face like this anymore. It's happening that the internet's a great thing because we are so connected, but it also takes away so much of what's important about communication, and, whittles it down to words on a page, quick words on a page, lots of words arguing back and forth on a page, or, just the access to information. I think people are more aware, because 70 years ago, depending on what part of the country you were in, maybe that wouldn't be a day-to-day scene. 70 years ago, that would have been a day-to-day scene, and then some. But now everyone can talk about it, and everyone can latch onto their ideas, and everybody can easily communicate their ideas with a broad audience. And we're missing this human interaction of talking to all of you people, having a face-to-face conversation. So I think that, just by having this conversation, I feel like I see all of the, I haven't met most of you. So it's nice to feel like I connected and see you as a person and understand you on a different level, that, when it's the Facebook event with everybody's name and profile, I don't know anything about you. So just more conversations like this. I'm really glad that I really appreciate everyone joining us tonight and having this conversation, and, taking the time out of your busy day to communicate as people and look at each other and understand each other as people. And I just really appreciate everyone taking these steps forward. And I hope that this is something that you guys can take back to your groups and, your communities, your friends, your family, and just talk openly like this.
Rosa, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I actually have a question for our non-minority friends on this Zoom call. Do you, in your perspective circles, predominantly white circles, are there conversations being had about racism and some of the things that you are hearing about, or maybe even seeing or witnessing? Is the one part of my question. And then the second part is, do you feel comfortable at explaining different perspectives? And is there anything that I can do to help? Because a lot of people kind of sometimes just don't know what to say.
I think a lot of people don't know what to say because they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. And that is what, this is not something that gets, at least not in my circles. Depends, but, I don't think that this kind of conversation happens enough along more predominantly white groups of people. And I think that, I don't want to go up to a friend who's Black or Asian or Indian or whatever and say, so Quinn, tell me about your experience being a Black man in America. Like, I don't want to make Quinn feel uncomfortable. And I don't know how to necessarily bring up that conversation. I think that this past year has definitely opened up that dialogue a lot more in groups of predominantly white people and just among my friends that are minorities, that conversations that we wouldn't have necessarily had. And I'm really grateful for that. But the biggest thing that I hear from people is just, I want to support, but I don't want to do or say the wrong thing.
I hear that a lot from my white counterparts, just at work, in different social circles. Like, I don't want to offend. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be wrong. And I think that the only way, like, it has to be a safe zone, right? Like, what Detroit Spartans have created is a safe zone. We have some norms in this conversation. And I think that, again, having those conversations, and even if someone knows that you're being genuine, you're probably not going to offend me, because I know that you genuinely don't know and don't understand and really are trying to get more knowledge. But if you're facetious, or, this is just like a quote account, right? Then I might, put the hold on finger to you. Like, don't ask me. Like, I'm not a pet. Please don't pat my hair, right? But if you want to know about it, then let's talk about it. But again, having those safe zones like this forum here, but you have to also know that you might say something wrong in your eyes, but it's really you genuinely just not knowing. It's kind of being ignorant, but once you gain knowledge, you're no longer ignorant. So it's also kind of having a strength and confidence in yourself as well.
I want to put a star on that point too. Like, Ty is right. Like, if we have that relationship, fun fact, I was a student assembly chairperson at ASMSU when I was there, and there were conservative people there who we genuinely just politically disagreed, but we had a good conversation because we had a trust that we were just inquisitive about the other person's mindset. When you have that trust, I mean, it's an open book. But when you're like firing away, like, well, why don't you people like this? It's like, whoa, where did that general statement come from? Paul, go ahead.
So I guess I have a question, because I would say probably, and I don't know where this came from. I don't know if I heard this, someone told me this or whatever, but my understanding was that it was more appropriate to call someone African American than Black. And when there was a situation this school year where I was talking to a Black mom on the phone, and because I felt like I was under the understanding that it was more appropriate to use African American than it was Black, I used African American with her. And this mother came unglued at me on the phone and said, I am Black, I am not African American. And so I guess for me, I was like taken back a little bit. I'm thinking, okay, I don't want to offend anybody, but what is the way to handle that situation? I was smiling there.
I was waiting for somebody else to jump in, so I'll let them jump in. I would just say,
listen, I'm Black. But if you say African American, I don't get offended. But my principal actually asked me, she's like, I don't know what the correct name. I'm like, I'm Black, but I don't, if you say African American, I don't personally take it offensive. I guess the safest way is to ask, do you have a preference, right?
I was gonna say that, Paul.
Yeah.
You probably want to ask, apologize, or do you have a preference? I had an interesting conversation with someone. They said they don't like the term "who is Black." They don't like the term African American because someone can be South African and be African American, and you can be white from South Africa, and etc. And I never thought about that. And that is so true. I don't identify as African American. I identify as other because that's what I am. If you want to put a label on it, but I think Steve brought up a great point. Is I just apologize and I'm sorry. And kind of just ask, and because that is such a subjective perspective I've learned and grown with over the years.
Yeah, I would just say approach it with care too. I mean, just approach it with care. If the empathy is in the moment, like I bet that parent was just hyped up anyway. So if it could have been where if you had called African American or if you had called a Black, she'd be like, I'm African American, because there's emotion. So if you approach it with care, like empathetically and genuinely, I think that's what matters.
In Quinn, along that lines too, is in our discussions at work, we learn that there's intent and there's impact. That somebody may not have an intent to be difficult, but it could still have an impact on the other side. And you just have to deal with it when those mismatches come up.
Absolutely.
So Rosa, I don't feel like anyone's answered your question, so I'll take a crack at it in regards to, so basically, when we started this school year, my coworker, I have one other counselor I work with, her and I had some conversation, and she's white. We had some conversation. She's very passionate about supporting our Black students, and we had serious conversations about and wanted to get. We have 2 Black gentlemen on our staff to get them involved with helping us look at our social emotional lessons that we do with our students, to incorporate some of the things that have happened in the last year into helping our students feel supported at school. So we have had those conversations. Now, as a friend group, no, we've not. I mean, I have individual friends that I've had conversations with about Black Lives Matters and Blue Lives Matters and all the different things, and all the things that have happened in the last year, and but I've not had it like this, a big group of my white friends, have a conversation about it. I appreciate this evening because of the fact that we recently got our demographic information from Michigan State, and we have a very low percentage of Black alumni in Indianapolis. But really and truthfully, two of the I think it's 78 Black alumni that live in Indianapolis. 2 of them, one's on the board, and well, I guess there's 3 that I'm really good friends with. I truly feel like we are good friends, and I appreciate their insight into helping me be better educated in regards to the things that they're dealing with as a Black male and female.
It's awesome.
Thanks, Paul. So I brought that up to say, in the interest of time, these are fluid conversations. I will more than happy for this group make myself personally available to my non-minority comrades to help, because the discussion is how we move forward. Learning is how we move forward, and raising that next generation and building that village and community. So I, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or Messenger. I'm more than willing to carve time out my day to be a resource in anything, whether it's at work and building programs. Because I don't know if I said this, I am a lawyer. I'm on tons of diversity initiatives and pipelines and everything. So I've had great success with it, and even in the legal services community and getting our numbers up and making people aware. But I just want to say I am a resource, and I'm here for anyone on this call who would need some assistance or just wants to have a conversation.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just volunteer everyone that on this call. I shouldn't, but I will, because we're alumni, and I think we all have ties with each other to help each other kind of grow and learn. I think the whole point of this conversation was to help you to have conversations. There are realms in which you guys can get through to people that we can't. And the whole intent for this is for you to have conversations with your circles of influence. We were just hoping to impress upon you guys different perspectives, hear your perspectives, so you can influence and we can influence the people that we know, because the reality is that that's where the conversations need to happen. And until they do, we're going to be in these insanity loops and the echo chambers where, I'm over here saying, well, Black Lives Matter. And you're like, well, wait, Blue Lives Matter. It's like, no, we need to come together and realize that we're not fighting each other. It's not oppositional strength that we're having here. We're trying to come together. And so I do want to just thank everyone here for participating in this conversation. It's a hard conversation, and the point is never for it to land with us coming up with world peace, because that would be kind of hard to do. If it were, we'd be brilliant and rich and go down in history. But I mean, we could at least help to see questions and thoughts, to have curious and honest conversations. The book I mentioned, I didn't write any notes, it's called How to Be an Anti-Racist. I highly recommend reading it. That's where the thought process, I knew it, but I was able to express it after reading that book, that racism isn't always about people, but it's an action word. We all have the capability to say and do racist things. And, just because you're not racist to everyone doesn't mean you haven't said something racist before. But there's also another book I recommend called White Fragility. And it kind of speaks to a person's not history, but their journey through recognizing that race was never something they dealt with, and dealing with it's something. So I have people in my life who are, I'm a financial advisor, so I deal with a lot of conservative white individuals. And the biggest challenge they're having right now is now they kind of feel persecuted for their race. And it's like, oh, how the tables have turned, because this is the argument. We feel persecuted, and now you feel as a white male, you're being attacked for being who you are. Well, that's kind of like the shoes on the other foot. And so the book White Fragility is a great journey through that. It helps to just kind of highlight just some of the parallels and some of the differences. So I'll share that resource. And where we go from here is something we can talk about. But before we hang this thing up, I just want to see if there's anybody who has any burning comment or thought or question or feedback.
I would just say a couple things. I think this has been awesome. I did actually go through a 8-night series of anti-racist training. It was excellent. And it was through the Center for Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation. It was great. One thing that they talked about a lot was BIPOC, BIPOC. So if anybody ever hears that term, it stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. The other thing that we really touched on in that was also the Indigenous communities and the Native American communities. And I know, Cayman, you're in Traverse City. Rosa, you said that's part of your background. We did touch on that, and we gave recognition of the land that all of us were on, which obviously were from various tribes from many, many years ago. So that was really good. And I'd be interested, in hearing more about that as well, and what, what resources there are to learn more about that as well. But thank you. It was this has been great. And I would love to continue the conversation if anybody else is interested.
Thank you, Ann. All right, anyone else? Speak now, forever, not forever hold your peace, but we're gonna wrap this thing up for tonight because it's a nightcap time in my house. So Bourbon's calling me. But I genuinely want to thank you guys for participating. I encourage you and challenge you to have these conversations in your communities. And, you know, you guys know we're all alumni, so we're not too hard to find in terms of if you have questions or if you have a challenge, if you say, hey, you know what, you said this, but I don't know, really good with that. And you want to talk about it, but you really want to have a constructive conversation. We're open to having those conversations and hearing it out. So the whole point is not to beat people over the head, but ask honest questions and help each other grow. So hope you guys have a great night. And with that, we'll close it out. Go Green.
Go White.
Thank you.
Hi, guys. Thank you.
Thanks for showing up.